Are we at war with Iran? According to President Trump, we are not yet, but soon could be if Iran does not agree to a nuclear deal. But of course, the U.S. is involved in basically every event around the world. So President Trump's statement to me sounds less like disinterested analysis and more like a threat, more like a negotiation from the man who wrote the art of the deal. There's a news story out from Reuters reporting that President Trump has been restraining the Israelis by vetoing a plan to assassinate Iran's supreme leader, which likewise strikes me less like a news report and more like a negotiation and a threat, as if Trump is saying, hey, mullahs, I told the Israelis not to kill you, but don't test my patience. I could not tell them that too. Pundits and activists on both sides of the aisle are fuming over this war. On the one side, you've got the hawks screaming that Iran is 5 minutes away from building a nuclear bomb and the fate of the world rests on our glassing Iran right now. On the other side, you got the doves screaming that this war is nothing more than a fight between two dusty countries in the Middle East, one of which is dragging us against our will into war. And as usual, the people in politics who are screaming their heads off don't know what they're talking about. They're wrong. That's a good rule of thumb. If someone's screaming his head off, it probably doesn't have the tightest grip on reality. This war is not about what anybody seems to think it's about. So we will get into what it is. I'm Michael Knowles. This is The Michael Knowles Show. Welcome back to the show. A lot of death on the show today. Two Minnesota lawmakers have been shot. One of them, along with the spouse, has died. The shooter, we're learning a little bit more about the shooter. This is the weirdest shooter story, politician assassin story that I have heard since Butler, Pennsylvania, since President Trump came within 1/20th of an inch of getting his head blown off. Really bizarre stuff. The Dems are saying he's a Republican. The Republicans are saying he's a Democrat. The story's even weirder than that. We'll get to it in a moment. First, I want to tell you about Armra. Go to tryarmra.com/Knowles. Ever wonder what gives elite athletes, business moguls, and high performers their edge? Many are turning to Armra colostrum. This remarkable superfood is nature's original whole food supplement containing over 400 bioactive nutrients that work at the cellular level. Armra helps build lean muscle, speeds up recovery time, and enhances overall performance without relying on artificial stimulants or synthetic ingredients. Whether you're running a company, pushing your limits in training, or simply looking for a natural advantage in your daily life, Armra colostrum optimizes your body's systems for peak performance and sustained energy. Research has demonstrated that colostrum does more than just strengthen performance. It enhances your body's ability to absorb essential nutrients, supports the development of lean muscle mass, and improves endurance. At the same time, works at the cellular level to accelerate repair and regeneration, helping you bounce back faster after intense physical exertion. You know, Mr. Davies, he's actually a decathlete, I'm sorry to admit. And Mr. Davies swears by this stuff. We've worked out a special offer for the crème de la crème here. Receive 15% off your first order. Go to tryarmra.com/Knowles, Canada, or enter Knowles to get 15% off your first order. tryarmra.com/Knowles. What is the war in Iran really about? So the update is the Israelis have gone in. They've just decapitated the top of the Iranian military establishment. They have gone in. They haven't yet killed the supreme leader, though President Trump is suggesting the only reason they haven't yet is because he's told them not to. That the Israelis have lost, I think the number today is up to 24 people. Last night it was 14 people. I guess now it's being reported it's closer to 24. The Iranians have lost like hundreds of people. So it's much larger casualty count in Iran. What's this really about? On the one hand, you have the hawks saying that Iran is 5 minutes away from a nuclear weapon. And if we don't stop them right now, if we don't go into this war right now, then the world is going to end. The fate of the world rests upon the Israelis going in and attacking Iran right now. I don't totally buy that. On the other hand, you have these isolationists. And in some cases, you have isolationists is critics of the state of Israel, and in some cases, actual anti-Semites who just don't like the Jews on an ethnic basis. You've got all of them accusing Israel of dragging us, kicking and screaming into a war that we want no part of, but they're just dog walking us into this war. I don't really buy that either. So what is actually going on here? I think what's actually going on is much bigger than either of those things. The question you got to ask yourself is why now? Why are the Israelis going in now? The official story is because Iran is 5 seconds away from a nuclear bomb. I don't really buy that. We've been hearing that Iran is 5 minutes away from a nuclear bomb since the early 80s, okay? Then we heard it again in the early 90s, and we heard it in the early 2000s, and we heard it. I don't buy that exactly. Iran definitely wants a nuclear weapon. Iran definitely has a nuclear program. The Israelis are arguing that the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has a new report that came out in June to show that Iran is 5 seconds away from a bomb, and that's why they had to go in. But the IAEA actually kind of denies that justification. So I don't think that's really it. I think the reason that the Israelis went in now is not really primarily about a nuclear weapon. I think it's about regime change in Iran. They believe that Iran poses an existential threat to the state of Israel. Iran has said, isn't it in the Iranian constitution they want to wipe out the state of Israel? So they see an existential threat there. They see that the mullahs are weak right now. And as a result of the war that followed the October 7th attack, the Israelis have systematically taken out all of Iran's proxies. So Hamas, which is just a proxy for Iran, neutered. Hezbollah, which is just a proxy for Iran, neutered with those pagers, literally neutered in that case. The Houthis have been taken out largely by the Americans. So Iran is really vulnerable. They don't really have a lot of their proxies left. So that's why. It's not primarily about the bomb. It's primarily about regime change. The reason why right now is not because Iran's 5 seconds away from a bomb, though I'm sure they're advancing in their nuclear program. The reason right now is because Iran is super weak, because the mullahs are super weak. Okay, so then is this just about the Israelis dragging us kicking and screaming into a war? I don't think it's really about that either, because a lot of people don't like the mullahs in Iran. Saudi Arabia doesn't really like the mullahs in Iran. Egypt doesn't really like the mullahs in Iran. The United States obviously doesn't really like the mullahs in Iran. Even some other countries. Qatar. Well, even around the Middle East, Bahrain doesn't like the mullahs in Iran. The list goes on and on. But even other countries, Qatar kind of helps Iran proxies sometimes, but Qatar also sucks up to the United States, and Qatar also gives us nice airplanes. And so I don't know that Qatar would be so upset if the mullahs in Iran went away. Turkey, we have tensions with Turkey, but also Turkey is a NATO ally going back to the 50s, so we kind of play nice with them. And I don't think Turkey would be so upset if the mullahs in Iran went away. So I think what you're seeing here is great power politics. Because who are the allies of the mullahs? The allies of the mullahs in Iran are Russia, China, those are the big powers, Venezuela, North Korea, places that we don't get along with and that our allies don't really get along with either. This is what's going on in Iran. Is a great power struggle. That's what it is. What's going on in Ukraine is a great power struggle. Very often, these wars that break out are great power struggles. Very rarely, certainly in geopolitics, but even in domestic politics, very rarely is the apparent issue the whole story. We think we're fighting over one tiny little issue, but really there's a lot more going on. There are coalitions that have been built. There are great power struggles. How did World War II break out? Why did World War II break out? Can you explain in one sentence how and why World War II broke out? Even people who are going to say it's because Hitler invaded, what, Poland? I guess, sort of Czechoslovakia, Austria? I don't know. France? I don't know. Is it because was it become a global war because the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor? What? Even harder than that. How did World War I break out? Is it because a Serbian nationalist shot the Archduke Franz Ferdinand? Is that, I guess technically that's why? But obviously there was much more going on. There were major great power struggles. And that's what's going on here. The reason this is breaking out now is because of the context of a long-standing great power struggle, which is not completely separate from the war in Ukraine. Trump was asked about the strikes, and he's been playing it cool as a cucumber. He says, look, we didn't do this. We're not part of this. Iran better not hit our bases. He said, but, and this is according to reporting from CNN, but Everyone I've been dealing with in Iran is now dead. He's been trying to get a nuclear deal. He gave Iran 60 days. Iran would not budge on certain American demands. So day 61, the Israelis go in and rain down hellfire on them. And Trump says, look, everyone I've been dealing with in the Iran negotiations is now dead. And the reporter asked, well, this is unfortunately, we don't have a tape of it. I'm sure it would have been a great performance. But the reporter asked, well, are they dead because of the negotiations, because they wouldn't come to a deal? And Trump says, well, they didn't die of COVID. they didn't die of the flu. So all of that to say, I mentioned on the show on Friday, I do not want the United States to be dragged into a regime change war in the Middle East. I don't want American soldiers involved in this. I don't want to be bogged down in some Middle East quagmire. I don't want our resources and our attention to be taken up by this battle, because I'd much rather keep an eye on China and Taiwan and wrap up the Ukraine conflict and not have to sink American blood and treasure into another regime change war in the Middle East. We've had enough of those over the past quarter century. However, as I point out on the show a lot, America is the global empire. We just are. We're not a yeoman nation. We don't just stick to ourselves. It's just not how it works. Even the broad system of nation states that we think we live under since the Westphalian Peace is not really true. There are empires. There are spheres of influence. There are strategic alliances. There were coalitions of nations. And so we can't totally avoid it. That's why I'm not screaming my head off. I'm not surprised by the outbreak of this war. Just like I wasn't surprised by the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. Just like I won't be surprised if there's an outbreak of war around Taiwan. There are great power battles around empires. And what it is incumbent on Trump to do now is to try to maintain the peace. Because I guess this is what would separate my view from the view of, say, the neocons or the liberal imperialists or whatever, is they want to just light up every country in the world. They never saw a non-liberal regime they didn't want to overthrow. So they love that stuff. That's not my view of empire. My view of empire is not light it up. My view of empire is the classical view of empire, which is that the empire exists for a reason, which is to establish peace. Going all the way back to the Aeneid and Virgil writing about the Romans, he says the art of the Romans is to govern. Other peoples have other arts, dry cleaning and sushi, but our art is governing. And the purpose of the empire, understood throughout Christendom, is to establish peace. One hopes, because we will be involved. There's no question that we will be involved. We're already involved. We've been involved from the beginning. You can track. There's an account on Twitter called the Pentagon Pizza Index, and you can when the wait times at the pizza stores around the Pentagon are extending late at night. They're working on something. Something's about to go down. What we hope occurs is that the aims of this kind of war, which obviously are regime change, that they remain restrained, circumscribed, relatively modest, and are aimed not towards some radical liberal revolution, not toward establishing Madisonian democracy in Iran or whatever, but just toward maintaining the peace, advancing America's interests, keeping our allies in all their ducks in a row, keeping them in their proper place, and then we move on. Now, speaking of oil, I want to tell you about Chevron.
America is built on hard work and powered by American energy. Chevron has spent $44 billion with local businesses across all 50 states since 2022, fueling infrastructure and communities, all while strengthening local economies. Last year, Chevron increased U.S. production nearly 20%, powering communities and businesses from the heartlands to the coasts. We're helping to fuel America's energy advantage, building a brighter future right here at home. Visit chevron.com/America to discover more.
A lot of death on this show today. A guy shot 2 Minnesota lawmakers along with their spouses. A female lawmaker and her husband were killed, and then a male lawmaker and his wife were wounded. The one who was killed is Melissa Hortman, former Speaker of the Minnesota House. She and her husband were shot and killed at their home early Saturday. The notable aspect of her political career is she's a Democrat. So instantly you say, okay, well, it's got to be a right-wing Republican who shot her. She's a Democrat, but she was the only Democrat in the Minnesota House to oppose funding health care for illegal aliens. So she's a Democrat, but she voted with the Republicans. She was the only lawmaker who was actually killed. A second state lawmaker, Senator John Hoffman, and his wife were shot multiple times and appear to have survived. Then we don't know who this guy is, but the police take a photograph of his car, and there are no Kings flyers on his seat. So no Kings, we'll get to that in just a moment. No Kings was this kind of weak, astroturfed, completely cringe protest of Trump over the weekend. So he's got flyers protesting Trump all over his car. He goes out and shoots, allegedly, the only Democrat lawmaker who voted against funding healthcare for illegal aliens. But then there's some evidence that he's a Republican. So all of the evidence that we've seen so far makes you think this would be a Democrat, a far leftist, who's upset at a moderate leftist and who's upset at Trump. But then we find out the suspect is a 57-year-old guy. And he, even though it looked like his car was law enforcement, it seems he was just posing as law enforcement. It wasn't a real law enforcement car. We then find out he's got a LinkedIn or other kind of resume that said that he owned a security company. So you say, okay, that sounds more like a right-winger. It says he did security work overseas, but then actually there's no evidence that he ever did any of that. It might have been just totally made up. It might have just been quite just as fictional as the fictional police car that he drove to commit the crimes. Then we find out, on top of all of this, that he was appointed to a state board, the Workforce Development Board, by the super lib Democrat governor Tim Walz back in 2019. So then you think, okay, I guess he's a lib, but the board was nonpartisan, and I guess he had been appointed to another board by a Republican, maybe, and then they interview the roommate. The roommate says that this shooter was a Trump supporter. So then you say, okay, he's a Republican, but then the roommate says he actually hadn't really talked about politics much recently. And then we get the text. So the alleged shooter sends a text to his roommate saying, first of all, this is like a 57-year-old guy who seems like kind of a loner. He's got roommates. Doesn't seem like he's living in a great family situation. Seems like he's making up a fair bit of his resume. Says, I just want to let you know that I love you guys both. I don't want to say anything more and implicate you in any way because you guys don't know anything about this, but I love you guys and I'm sorry for all the trouble this has caused. Totally bizarre. They then interview the roommate about the alleged shooter's security background. They said, yeah, we basically just played pretend. We played pretend cops, played pretend army men. And he wanted to get a security company off the ground, but he couldn't. I think he worked in the food industry or a convenience store or something. So this is really bizarre. This reminds me of Butler, Pennsylvania. This reminds me of the attempt to kill Trump. Because just as in this case, in Butler, Pennsylvania, the alleged shooter, I guess I don't need to worry about him suing me for slander or libel. You know, that's why we say alleged in journalism is, you know, you don't want to be sued for slander or libel, even if all of the evidence points to the guy. But in this case, that guy had his brains blown out. So I guess I don't need to say alleged anymore, just force of habit. That guy was ostensibly a registered Republican, but his only political donation ever were to Democrats, and he obviously tried to murder Trump. So you can't quite pinpoint his politics. Same thing with this guy. He, I guess, said he was a Republican and liked Trump, but then he had the No Kings anti-Trump flyers in his car, and then he attacked a Democrat, but it was the Democrat who disagreed with the other Democrats, and sometimes political violence, sometimes violence is motivated by politics, by ideology. That does really happen, and it tends to happen more on the left. You see a lot of political violence on the left, basically none on the right. So I'm not discounting that. Sometimes ideology motivates violence. Sometimes religion motivates violence. Sometimes terrorism, which is targeting civilians for political purposes, motivates violence. And sometimes people are just kind of crazy. And I know that's going to seem like a cop-out to a lot of people, but it's really not. It expresses a truth about human nature that in secular modernity we don't want to acknowledge, namely that the perversity of the human heart is much deeper and broader and much less predictable than we acknowledge in modernity. We think human beings are like computers and we just kind of figure them out and we run an operating system and that's that. No. Concupiscence And the perversity of the human heart are a lot more complex than that. And this guy might have just been kind of a weirdo. And the fact that you can't quite place him politically speaks to that. And the fact that, unlike in Butler, Pennsylvania, where there were these totally inexplicable security failures, and where you're talking about Trump, and it's right before the RNC, and it seems like there might have been, if you're going to suggest a conspiracy, that one makes a little more sense, that there were so many just inexplicable errors apparently leading up to that. The timing was so on the nose. In this case, though, no one had really ever heard of these state lawmakers. What was this about? It might just have been a crazy guy. We don't like to hear that, but it might just have been a crazy guy. Now, I told you, he had these flyers, the No Kings flyers. There were protests. There were supposed to be 2,000 No Kings protests throughout the United States, and they were supposed to involve millions and millions of people. A popular uprising against Trump. What actually happened was a little different from what was promised. We'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to tell you about ExpressVPN. You go to expressvpn.com/Knowles. Here is something fascinating. Until the 1990s, I did not exist. Also until the 1990s, the US government classified encryptions as munitions. They categorized it alongside weapons. You know what? They weren't totally wrong. Encryption is powerful. It's your shield against those who want to exploit your personal information online. It's one of the reasons why I've been using ExpressVPN for years now. It's an elegant solution that encrypts your internet connection and routes it through secure servers, keeping your online activity private, just as it should be. I have used ExpressVPN personally for 6 or 7 years or something like that now. I mean, for a very, very long time. It's really important. You've got your finance stuff on your computer. You've got the political stuff you look at. You've got your family's pictures. You got all this stuff. Don't leave that all out in the open. Without encryption, your digital life is an open book. Your internet service provider can legally sell your browsing history. Data brokers track your every move across websites. Government agencies peek into your online world. Here's a beautiful part. ExpressVPN makes privacy simple. One tap, and when the app turns green, you're protected. Done. Phone, laptop, tablet, all done. Encryption is a weapon. It's one that you have a legal right to use for your own protection. It's up to you to exercise that right. Decide to take action today. Get 4 months for free by going to my special link, expressvpn.com/Knowles, K-N-O-W-L-E-S, expressvpn.com/Knowles, K-N-O-W-L-E-S, to get 4 extra months free and start protecting yourself today. 200 or thereabouts organizations set up the No Kings protest. We're talking about the American Federation of Teachers, the ACLU, those guys, the Communications Workers of America, all these super lib groups organized the No Kings protests. And there were supposed to be about 2,000, millions of protesters expected. Some of them were canceled before they were even to begin. And the reason they were canceled was lack of attendance. So one that made the news was Hollywood, Florida. Hollywood, Florida had a big protest planned, and they had to cancel it because no one was going to show up. So the organizers officially said that. Now, a bunch of them were pretty lackluster. Here's Chicago. So this is Chicago. This is a big city, super lib stronghold. You know, they shut down the street for it. And you look at the protest, and it's, you know, it's about one street wide, kind of slow, kind of orderly. It's not that there's nobody there. There are some people there, but it's just much more subdued than you would expect. The crowd is much older. And in fact, the people I know, I'm friends with a bunch of libs, and I have libs in my family and, you know, friend groups. I'm from New York. I lived in LA. And the people I know who went to the No Kings protest were not the radical blue-haired anarchists throwing Molotov cocktails. It was like boomers. It was like boomer Dems who just really don't like Trump, but they're orderly people. They have jobs. It wasn't, they were reliving Woodstock or something, man. I don't know. It was, you know, hey, remember the 60s? Or it was not forceful. I was driving in Nashville. I was about to get on the freeway, and I see there was a No Kings protest. It was half a dozen people, median age, probably about 67, you know, really excited to get the signs. We don't like Trump, No Kings, whatever. It seemed relatively small, the whole thing. It skewed a bit older. It was weak sauce, of course. Because when the libs had popular protests of Trump in the first term, they could at least gin up some media attention and gin up some excitement around it because they say, well, Trump lost the popular vote. Trump, there were all these, Russia hacked the election. It was a total fluke, whatever. But then Trump just kept winning. And then this time he won not only the Electoral College, but the popular vote. And he won not only white guys, but also almost half of Hispanics and a ton of women and a disproportionate number of black guys. And it's hard to have a popular uprising against the guy who won the popular vote. So why no kings? Why no kings? This is new. And I think it's a weak rebranding. Because normally when the Dems protest a Republican, it's no Nazis, no Hitler, no dictators, no fascists. No, now it's no kings. Which, as sweet little Elisa pointed out last night, is really bad PR. Because it's cool to be a king, man. You come at the king, you best not miss. Be like, yo, king, you dropped your crown. Hey, what's up, king? That's not just a far right-wing ideologue kind of expression. It's cool to be a king, man. Kings are cool. So why no kings? I think they were trying to impel their followers to behave a certain way. I think that when you say Trump's Hitler or whatever, Trump's a Nazi, poses an existential threat to the country, I think you are pushing your followers to behave in ways that are a little more radical, a little more modern. Who are the enemies of the Nazis? Well, it's not just the American and British troops, it's the communists. Antifa's going to get out there. And you got the fascists, you got the anti-fascists. Oh no, we don't want our guys to behave like Antifa. That makes us look really bad. We don't want, especially following the riots in LA, we don't want our followers to seem anti-American. We don't want them waving the flags of foreign nations. That was a complete mistake. Okay, how can we make our followers get out in the streets, but also seem kind of patriotic? Well, let's rewind it. Let's not focus this around 20th century mythology, the mythology of surrounding the Second World War. We need to frame this around 18th century mythology. And we're going to make this about the American Revolution. No kings. No king. Okay, so what? We're going to wave the Betsy Ross flag? The libs already told us the Betsy Ross flag is racist. You can't even put it on sneakers. So what are they really going to get? I think the libs picked no kings because they want their followers to seem less anti-American for the TV cameras. Because the LA riots were a complete flop. The LA riots were organized by the left and they were a flop. They did not win the left votes. They actually lost the left support. So they tried their best and this one flopped too. Flopped hard. And part of that is just the historical fact. Even if you wanted to frame this around an 18th century idea, America was not founded in opposition to monarchy. We almost had a monarchy in America. Alexander Hamilton was advocating for a kind of a monarchy in America. America was founded on principles that demanded political independence, but it wasn't anti-monarchy. The French Revolution that followed was anti-monarchy. But as Edmund Burke, for instance, pointed out, the American Revolution was much more conservative. The American Revolution was undertaken in a much more orderly way, from the top down, partaking of principles of subsidiarity. The French Revolution was a bunch of rabble chopping heads off, opposed to throne and altar. Wanted to overthrow not only the monarchy, but Christianity, the whole ancien regime. In fact, I think it was Adrian Vermeule pointed this out on Twitter. There has been an argument that the American presidency is in many ways the last monarchy that survived from the old regime. Even though we're not a monarchy technically, but we still have an executive that has a lot of power. Trump, man, Trump's kind of the king, man. He really is kind of the king in a way, but all American presidents are. They have real power. The American presidency has much more in the way of monarchical power than the King of England does, than King Charles does, than any of the kind of sidelined kings, the King of Spain. So the no kings thing was never going to work. And my friend Nate Fisher pointed out, the no kings protest, if the libs are really going to make this the new focal point, Trump's a king and we don't want kings here, whatever, it might actually encourage a healthy reexamination of political regimes, including monarchy on the right. Because America, we've been told in recent years, America's a democracy. Not really a democracy. America's a republic. Then the right-wingers say, well, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. But actually, that's not what the American regime is. The American regime, going all the way back to the Constitution, is a mixed regime. That's the point. The Founding Fathers were explicit about this. Yes, Benjamin Franklin says, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. But more than that, it is a mixed regime because the American framers and founders wanted to escape the cycle of regimes that causes monarchies to collapse. The three forms of government, monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, into their kind of negative forms, which is tyranny, oligarchy, and mob rule. And so the cycle goes on through revolutions. And the American framers wanted to escape that. And so the way to escape that, as St. Thomas Aquinas points out in the Summa Theologiae, is you have a mixed regime that has a monarchical element, in our case the presidency, with an aristocratic element. At the founding would have been the Senate and maybe some other. Now we have direct election of senators, that's a little bit weakened, and a democratic element, which would be the House of Representatives. And then you have subsidiarity from the federal government all the way down to the local governments. It's a mixed regime. Now, probably the libs, when they started their No Kings protest, didn't want Americans to be reflecting on regimes and political philosophy and what America really means. But they didn't get what they really wanted, which was a popular uprising in the street. And the fact that they had to change their tune, I think shows you they just don't know what they're about right now. Fundamentally, the Democrats don't know what they're about right now. Are they for open borders or are they for border security? They don't know. Are they for free trade or are they for protecting American workers? They don't know. Are they for Israel or are they for Palestine? They don't know. Are they for what? What are they for? They don't know. No kings. I don't know, man. Trump looking more and more like a king every day. Speaking of the libs acting up, Democrat Senator, U.S. Senator Alex Padilla has just been taken down by the FBI and the United States Secret Service. I mean that very literally. He showed up to an event. He started harassing a member of the Trump administration, and the FBI and the Secret Service had to grab him because he got out of control and started shoving law enforcement officers around.
I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions. So you can see him.
He's pushing on either. I can't tell if that's FBI or Secret Service. He's wearing kind of plain clothes. It's a U.S. senator. This maniac is a U.S. senator. I think here he was protesting Kristi Noem. He was trying to rush the stage with Kristi Noem, this female cabinet secretary. And so Trump comes in, or rather, law enforcement of the Trump administration comes in. They say, "You're not allowed to do that, Senator. Sorry. We're going to grab you. We're going to get you out of the room." This was probably a stunt to set the stage also for the No Kings protest, and that flopped too. Because when I watch Democrat even elected politicians go up and physically start to threaten female members of the Trump administration, well, it reminds me of Maxine Waters, sitting Democrat Congress lady, who said in the first Trump term, when you see Republicans in public, you push back on them. You tell them they're not welcome here. You go to their house. Are you insane, lady? When I see Hillary Clinton say, you can't be civil with Republicans. Well, I see all this stuff. That doesn't make me think that Trump needs to be less forceful. Makes me think, no, Trump needs to be more forceful in maintaining order and enforcing the law. What I'm hoping for, by the end of Senator Padilla's nonsense, by the end of the No Kings protest, I'm basically waiting for President Trump to go full Charles II.
Anyone who denies this truth makes themselves an enemy of God, king, and country. Think on that before you take another step towards chaos. All the world may see what a point we have come to. Nothing that begins in such division is likely to end well. I declare Parliament dissolved. Gentlemen, go home. I will not trouble you any further.
Gentlemen, go home. The Parliament is dissolved. I know, I'm very happy to say, I know that there are members of the administration who listen to this show regularly. And I know, and plenty of Republicans on Capitol Hill, take note. That's what I want to see. That's the response to the No Kings protest. I want Trump to saunter in. Look, Charles II had drip. Trump's got a lot of drip in his own way. Walk in there, shiny, glammed up. Gentlemen, go home. You're dissolved. Okay, I won't trouble you any further. Bye. Bye, Alex Padilla. Get out. That's what I want. I mentioned the Harvard professor Adrian Vermeule just now on the show. I loved his response to the No Kings protest. He said, "No kings," but as a complaint. Oh, no kings? Not yet. We got to wait for Octavian, Baron Augustus Trump to come in. Okay, speaking of inappropriate behavior, we turn from Democrats to prostitutes on the internet because one of the OnlyFans people has just made a claim about that website, this website. She says there is a performer on the OnlyFans website that is destroying OnlyFans and is actually changing the porn site to no longer be about empowering women. The mob is back in the streets, burning flags, torching cars, attacking cops. Once again, the media are calling it justice, but we've seen this song before. At the Daily Wire, we do not sit back, we fight. We build platforms they can't cancel. We tell stories they can't control. We create the future they can't burn down. Join millions of people who still believe in truth, courage, and common sense at dailywireplus.com. My favorite comment yesterday is from Mernouche McKh, MKH, who says, "You Americans can say whatever you want, but as an Iranian, that I know what's going on in Iran. People in Iran pray for Bibi in Israel. We call IDF the Freedom Army for Iran." Yeah, look, I believe that, okay? I don't know if you mean you're in Iran right now or you're more likely in America or outside of Iran, but you still have people in Iran. That's true. I, as an American, want to minimize the American involvement in this war because I don't want to get bogged down in a 2-decade quagmire to establish Madisonian democracy in the Middle East when it doesn't necessarily serve our immediate interests. Might serve our strategic interests long term, but not our immediate interests. And the risks, I think, are very high, and the public doesn't want it. And it could also imperil the rest of Trump's agenda. And the list goes on and on as to why I want to minimize our involvement in this war. However, this is another point where I was mentioning at the top of the show, some people think, it's just the Israelis trying to drag us into this war. And there are other people. The most pro-war in Iran people I have ever met are Iranians who left Iran, whose families left after the Shah was deposed or whose families left in the 80s or 90s. Those guys very much pro-Israel going in and messing things up. Same thing. It's how I feel about the Lebanese. I have Lebanese friends who love it when Israel goes in and messes things up because they hate the Muslims and they hate what the Muslims did to their country. So anyway, I get it. I get that lots of people with lots of backgrounds from lots of different countries all have views and desires in this war. I'm just articulating my view as an American, but I get it. And I recognize also these are imperial power plays, and there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. Okay, speaking of inappropriate behavior, there's some OnlyFans lady. I'm not going to give them publicity by naming them, but there's some OnlyFans lady who is less famous than this other OnlyFans lady. Because I had heard of the other OnlyFans lady. I had not heard of the first OnlyFans lady. But the first OnlyFans lady is calling out the second OnlyFans lady for, quote, attention-grabbing chaos that disrespects the work of serious professionals. And the second OnlyFans lady is the one who said she was going to sleep with 1,000 guys in a day or, 2,000 guys in a day or whatever. I think we played one of the clips where she went into a Five Guys burger joint and said, "Hey, I want the guys. Where can I order the 5 guys? How much does that cost?" Ha ha ha. So the first OnlyFans lady was criticizing that girl, said, "It's no longer women empowerment. It's shock value." And she's making a joke out of all of us. Breaking news. Stop the presses. OnlyFans, no longer about women empowerment. No longer about... We built this space to take control of our bodies and our finances. To take control of your bodies, you're selling your bodies to men who can do whatever they like with it. And our finances, not to fake pregnancies. I guess the second girl faked a pregnancy. Weddings or throw cakes at strangers on the street. Brands don't take us seriously anymore. Brands don't take us prostitutes seriously anymore. Media doesn't take us seriously. Like, can you believe a person who has made a career out of whoring, going a whoring, is no longer taken seriously by corporate America or the media? I'm tired of explaining that not all of us are doing circus acts for views. Au contraire, mon frère. That's exactly what you're doing. One last line she says. She's criticized, obviously. She recognizes that it seems like she's not being introspective. And she said, well, if God gave me this platform, this body, this voice, why wouldn't I use it? It's not just about money. It's about taking care of my family. So, okay. So she says, we're not all doing circus acts for views. But of course they are. They're all doing circus acts. They're all providing a kind of tawdry, much more tawdry than the circus actually, entertainment for people and playing on various lusts and shallow desires of people and doing it for money. So she's saying, that other girl, that other OnlyFans prostitute, she's a clown. But they're all clowns. They're all clowns. And she explains how she became a clown, too. She says, look, you're going to say that I'm doing the same thing she is, but that's not true. How could you criticize my going a whoring on the television? Because God gave me this platform. I guess, if you're talking about providence and God's passive will, it is true, lady, you have come across this platform and you've cultivated a large following. And God gave me this body. That's certainly true. And God gave me this voice, the voice that actually becomes more the focus of this kind of pornography, and ultimately, I suppose, of all pornography, even than the body does. That's what's so interesting about the second lady, the one who says she's sleeping with 1,000 men, and she goes into the burger joint and says, I want 5 guys. Because the reason I can honestly say, I'm happy to say that I've never seen her work. I've never seen her behind the OnlyFans paywall work. But I have seen her popular media stuff pop up. I've seen all these little clips go viral. And the scintillating, titillating kind of that girl's putting out actually never involves her taking off any of her clothes. It's just using her voice, using her language to degrade herself, to play on the dark fantasies of men. But that's where the point is. That's really where most of her popular work is. I like to think most people have not seen her actual nude stuff. And, I don't think they have. I think most people are just seeing that. But that is enough to show you what pornography is, which is intrinsically about degrading and turning human beings from proper subjects with rights into objects that can just be melded to one's fantasies. It turns these people into nothing more than objects of amusement. It turns them into clowns. And that's what this girl's getting at. The first OnlyFans girl criticizing the second one. She says, God gave me all this stuff, my body, even my platform, certainly my voice. So why wouldn't I use it to go whore myself? Because God gave you those things for a purpose. He gave you those things. Those things have a purpose, and you have free will. And you can either use all those things to their proper end, or you can turn away from God's grace and turn away from the moral order and degrade yourself. You have that freedom to do it if you want it. But when you don't use things for their proper purpose, you turn yourself into a clown. If I have my leftist tears tumbler here, I'm drinking delicious leftist tears out of it. It's actually fruity millennial seltzer. But okay, I'm drinking it. That's good. If, on the other hand, I took this tumbler and just dumped it all on my head and wore it as a hat, I would make myself into a clown. It would be kind of funny. You'd probably laugh. I wouldn't be using this for its proper purpose, and it would be funny. It would be incongruous. It would be unexpected. It would be farcical. It would be dumb and stupid. I would degrade myself in doing that, and you would laugh because I'd be a clown. When you use your body in ways that are contrary to its purpose and contrary to your flourishing, you make yourself into a clown, into kind of a joke. People make jokes about you. People call you nasty names, and you look ridiculous. When you use your voice in those ways, you make yourself into a clown. The second girl, the one who's talking about sleeping with 1,000 guys in a day or whatever, she's kind of funny. When she went into the burger place and said, I want the 5 guys, that's kind of funny. I think I chuckled at it. But it's funny because it's perverse and subversive and unexpected and incongruous and wrong. It's just wrong. And that's fine. If you want to be a clown, go be a clown. But the one OnlyFans lady should not be criticizing the other OnlyFans lady. They're both doing exactly the same thing. And it's certainly not about empowering women or anyone else. It's not about empowering men either. It's degrading everyone and making everyone into a clown. The whores and the Johns alike, they're both making themselves into clowns. So maybe it's a good opportunity for all those gals to look themselves in the mirror and say, I don't have to live this way. I don't have to be a clown. I can take off the makeup and behave as I should. Now, speaking of show business, big showbiz story that I might not have time to get to because I'm a little teased, but Justin Bieber might be placed in a conservatorship because he seems like he's acting kind of crazy. And this story is actually quite related to the previous story, but we don't have time. So that's going to be my tease for tomorrow. Because today is Music Monday. The rest of the show continues now. You do not want to miss it. Become a member. Use code Knowles, Canada, WLES at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans.